where do we all live? Planet Earth. So go check out Planet Earth. Looking up to the sky or looking down into the mud or down in the ocean. Just find yourself there, because that's where we need to all be a lot more nowadays.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Webdelics podcast. I'm your host, Scott Mason, and with us today is a very special guest, David Drapkin of Psychedelics Today. David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. Good to be here, Scott. Thanks for having me on Webdelics. I'm an Englishman, born and raised in Birmingham. I've just lived in America for 11 years and returned to Israel for the last year. And my life's been, I have to write a story about it because it's been quite unexpected, to be honest. My childhood was all about mental health challenges and trauma. And then my kind of 20s was all about spiritual seeking, going to Asia, New Zealand, Australia, kind of healing and finding my path. And my 30s were trying to get a job and grow up and see myself as an adult. So becoming a social worker was a really big deal for me. Going into private practice as a therapist and getting married and having kids. So I've got two little kids, 10 and 8 years old. And psychedelics have been part of my life, and cannabis since I was a little boy, since I was a teenager. And they've kind of always been there in different ways, different kinds of relationships, different teachings. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that. And I've been at Psychedelics Today 3 years, and that's been life-changing. I'm loving being a podcaster like you. I do teaching as well. And I'm just really enjoying being alive in incredibly difficult times.
And I've got to say, what a great self-introduction that was. I feel alive just hearing it. David, welcome to the show. So the theme of today comes from the following bold statement that you shared with me during our pre-show, and it was so strong, I felt we just had to center the whole episode around it. That statement was, psychedelics is my soapbox. We're going to talk about why. But before we go into the nitty-gritty of why and what that means for anyone who's watching or listening, let's just begin the conversation by going big. You know, I say if we're going to talk, let's just shoot for the moon, not just be satisfied with some Mount Everest of conversation. On your LinkedIn profile, which is beautifully done, I have to say, I really enjoyed reading it. Y'all just check it out to see how someone can do a LinkedIn profile that is eloquent and personal. You say the following: you are a deep believer in our generation standing at the precipice of a paradigmatic shift. Again, that ain't going small. What does that statement mean?
So first of all, LinkedIn has been very good to me over the last 15 years. It really has, especially moving my career to psychedelics. And I'm using it. I don't have a website, so that's where I express myself. And, I'm pretty honest there. And thinking about where are we holding right now, paradigmatically. We're going through a tough phase right now in our history. We're living in the best times that we've ever had. And yet there's, without a doubt, the most kind of destructive human-caused outcomes that we've ever experienced. Just looking at climate changes and number one, and definitely war is top of mind, and mental health and addiction, and things like obesity and deforestation. So all of these different pieces that are violence and suicide. So there's a lot of, in a sense, negative outcomes that we are creating as an experience of the paradigm we're currently in. And so I feel like, first of all, it's really important to speak with truth and honesty about that. Like we've got good times right now, and there's a lot of people who are at the top of the heap. But let's look at everyone in the whole world, and let's look at our world itself. And so from that initial honesty of saying this is where we're holding and things do need to change, We simply can't go on like this. So what comes next? And that's why, it's not some incremental shift. It really does need to be a revolutionary paradigmatic change and evolution of many, many different systems that are kind of all interwoven within each other. So economic, social, political, cultural, and spiritual, anthropological evolution. What's going to help us to do that? So many different things. I'm not a hype fueled psychedelics are going to cure the world. There's many other pieces of this puzzle. But what psychedelics help us do is part of that puzzle. It's that going kind of more deeply within ourself and spotting what is true and what is not true and what is we're not sure about and what we're scared of. And I think we're scared of many things culturally and collectively. So this is all part of this just paradigmatic honesty and kind of reconciliation of where we are currently holding, which we have to do. Otherwise, we can't move forward until we kind of just kind of tune into where we are now.
So far, this podcast has explored the world of psychedelics through the eyes of someone who's not from that world originally, me, but as the avatar for millions and millions of people who are hearing about the psychedelic renaissance, who are seeing the word psychedelics or MDMA or psilocybin or ayahuasca or other words pop up in media everywhere, are beginning to get curious, but they don't really understand why they're such a big deal. Maybe they're scared because of some of the stigmas that have been attached to these substances. And if they are following this show from its inception, one of the things that they hopefully will find fascinating, and I have found fascinating, are the tendrils from which a discussion of psychedelics can expand our thinking around a whole host of issues, not the least of which many people would argue is the most critical of all, climate change, but also extractive culture, the nature of spirituality and religion, connection to each other, the emergence of new technology, a whole host of other mental health, as you've mentioned, a whole host of other areas that are uh, that are symptoms, if not outright evidence, that the frameworks within which we've been operating don't work. The question I have for you, though, is in a way thinking about these big picture implications of the psychedelic renaissance and how any or all of us becoming more involved in that world and learning and understanding and maybe even choosing um, to have them as part of your life self-expression is, well, doesn't everyone say that their generation is on the precipice of some big paradigmatic shift? Why are we different now, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's been prophets throughout the generations, throughout the worlds and religions that have spoken about impending doom, that the end is nigh. Um, it feels like the stakes are higher than ever for us right now. Simply as a psychotherapist, when we see the amount of suffering coming through hospitals and clinics and private practices with trauma, with particularly even just looking at adolescent suicidality, and overdoses from substance use, and the chronic loneliness that we're seeing, just from a mental health perspective, we are going through so much right now, and I think social media plays a role in that, and kind of toxic culture that we are living in around technology, and our kind of technological infrastructure has just rapidly evolved over the last 20, 30 years, whereas our brains, they're kind of like dinosaur evolution. They take thousands of years to evolve. Yes, we can have some lion's mane functional mushroom supplements, and that's going to help us a little bit, but we're playing catch up ultimately with a rapacious evolution of society in a way that is kind of not in our control, and AI we can think of as being emblematic of that. So we're not in control of the way that our society's evolved, and we can't keep up with it. And so the gap between where we are and where our kind of society is in this kind of hyper capitalist evolution of reality, there's a massive gap. And so what's filling that gap? And it might be TV and drugs and depression and other things and self-harm. And so for me, there's a huge gap right now that needs to be filled. Probably number one, just through silence. We need more silence, and rest, and going within, and relationship building within ourselves is number one. We're not trying to change anyone else or heal anyone else. I think a big problem that we are having is we've just become so disconnected from ourselves, and that's never really happened before. We've never lived in these boxes and had lights and technology constantly in our pocket, be rushing around all the time with calendars and emails and text all throughout the day. And we simply, I don't think, have been invented for this. So ultimately, I believe our nervous systems, our neurological systems, our somatically, our kind of breath is all being hijacked ultimately by this system that we exist in, and it's really hard to step out of it. And yes, psychedelics can really help, as do meditation, just being in nature and having a real conversation with ourselves, about things that we might not know exist within us, questions, fears, dreams and goals and desires, that if they just lurk under the surface, we ain't going to be happy, and we're not going to feel content, and we're not going to be true to ourselves, and that can really eat away at us, just knowing that unconsciously.
Three things leap out to me based on everything that you just said. One, how fascinating is it that at a time in which it's easier for us to connect with each other through platforms like Zoom, through social media, we feel more disconnected and lonely. I've got to say, like you, LinkedIn is a great place for self expression for me. And I've leveraged that particular platform to make a number of connections that probably will be lifetime. On the other hand, other platforms, I won't name names, they do seem to stoke insecurity, alienation, and separateness, if for no other reason than there can be a lot of one-upmanship or show-offy stuff or untruths that are spewed out there. So I find that irony within what you just said to be something worth pondering over. I hadn't really thought about it that way before. Number two, you're talking about nature and silence. Look,
Mm-hmm.
I spent nearly 25 years as a practicing attorney and a large organizational executive. Silence in litigation or with lawyers, or even when I ran operations, there was no such thing. I would try and get some silence, and then I'd find out a facility that my company was running had a fire. Right? It didn't have silence. And as an entrepreneur, there can be a lot of worship of the grind and the hustle, which is always moving, not having space and silence. So that's number two. But number three is something that I wanted to ask a little bit more about, because it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. But as I was listening to your voice, which, by the way, I've got a comment. It's very soothing. If you want to, I don't know if you're doing separate podcasts in which you just lull people into meditative states or talk them into a space of silence. But if not, David, you need to. But that being said, you mentioned the relationship to self. What does that mean, really? I think I understand it, but half the time I'm throwing words around. I don't know what the heck I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh, this is going to be a big one. So let's go there, Scott. Honestly,
Good.
relationship to self. Before we do, I just want to mention about silence, because it's interesting. A week ago, I'm an instructor in our 12-month Vital course in our group of 15 students that meet each week. We were talking about the value of silence as a space holder for holding space for other people. And we were saying that the people that we are able to have silence with and hold silence with them in relationship, those are the most powerful relationships that we've got. And the people that we've never had silence with, it means there's something there to be explored. Why not? And it made me realize, gosh, well, my mum and dad, I've never really had silence with them. Like the TV is always on, they're always on their phone, or there's always something happening. And it made me realize, gosh, the value of silence in relationships, just to really be there and to give time and space to that, is super. And that kind of is a segue into the question you're asking about kind of self-knowledge, self-awareness. And for me, I've been through quite a lot of tough experiences with my mental health, depression and OCD mainly. When I was a kid, I had quite a lot of self harm and kind of body dysmorphia and some eating disorders and some psychosis as well when I was just for a year or two. So my concept of self was really at stake there. Like I hated myself. I thought I was deformed, and I really, at times in my life, I've wanted to not be alive. And that was because of how I conceptualized myself. Like really hated myself. And it's, an easy antidote to that is, oh, I'm going to love myself. I'm great. And I tried that for a while. And I know I told you about it last time. I got electrocuted when I was 21, and I realized that I didn't really love myself. It was just an act that I was doing for other people, and just to kind of get by, and fake who I could pretend I was. But to really just know self, be imperfect within self, oh, it's tough. It really is. So I think a place to start with for me in this conversation, Scott, is having an appreciation for the multiplicity of selves, the
Mm.
kind of depths of the ranges of the aspects and the parts of what comprises selfhood, known and unknown, kind of, you know, beautiful and ugly, and those I fear and those I love, and it's infinite. So I think just an openness and a curiosity to explore those parts, and to know which parts am I of myself am I fighting against, and which parts of me are fighting with each other, and trying to really engage mindfully and with love and care those parts that really just they're the ones that are kind of red lights flashing. Let's go there.
Before we go any further into that, I do want to express extreme empathy for the portion of your statements a few seconds ago that involved hatred of the self. I mean, as I believe we discussed during our pre show, I've had issues with body dysmorphia in my life as well. I mean, I was jacked up on steroids like crazy for years because I hated the way I looked as a skinny person who wasn't even really skinny. One of the episodes that we recorded that will be coming up in the future on this podcast specifically addresses psychedelics and body dysmorphia, in that case, anorexia. But these are all destructions based on what you're just saying of relationship to the self that is healthy. You mentioned multiple selves. When I first heard those words come out of your mouth, I couldn't help but think of this TV movie from the 1970s, Sybil, in which Sally Field played a woman that had multiple personality disorder, and these personalities didn't jibe with each other. They didn't even know that the other ones existed. So she would black out as one person and live as someone else altogether. Then another personality would come over and forget that the other was. And then there was one, I think, that knew about the rest. And it was sort of a puppeteer, and they had different genders and all this sort of stuff. That's not what you're talking about when you talk about different selves. Or are we all secretly suffering from multiple personality
Mm.
disorder?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking for clarification. I'm definitely not saying my experience was of, in a sense, multiple selves or split personality. And I think that the definition now we use is dissociative identity disorder. And in a sense, it's that we can, I did used to disassociate quite a bit as a child, and I still do now. When I get very insecure or stressed out, I disassociate now. And so myself or my experience of being alive changes, in those moments of disassociation.
Mm.
But more broadly, I think I've been learning more about internal family systems lately, IFS, which speaks about parts within us that fulfill different roles, and they might come from different periods of our life. A certain kind of almost infrastructure feature of our identity, or emotional reactions, insecurities, fears, and they can often get suppressed and subsumed within our kind of broader ego. So what I've been doing lately is really giving voices to my parts, and getting to know them better. So probably only maybe about 10 or 12 so far that I'm really getting to know, and a lot of them are coming from my childhood, and they're fighting for attention, and they're needing love, and um, a part of, I guess a part, but overall, the idea here is that they all have some relevance, that they all have, in a sense, some worth and belonging, and they all deserve to kind of get time to express themselves and to be heard. Like they have a message, all the different needs and values and fears and angers and emotions, and on different levels of our psyche. Like we are so deep, and often we don't really kind of plunge the depths of our unconscious very often at all. Um, but I think with psychedelics, we can't avoid that. So I think through the use of psychedelics in particular, it just opens up all these different parts of ourselves and memories, and yeah, stuck trauma. And by being able to differentiate between them, it can be really helpful just for getting more curiosity and for more familiarity with each of them as a specific kind of entity within us.
Well, let's say though that I am D and I own a nail salon and I'm working hard and my staff is working hard and we're struggling to just make it through day to day to pay the bills. As of the date this podcast is being recorded, at least in the United States, inflation is widely perceived by the public as a major economic problem and stressor in people's lives. And like you said, all of these changes are going on in the backdrop. Social media is distracting. The infrastructure in a lot of countries like the United States isn't what it needs to be. There are hassles everywhere. People are not as civil as they used to be. Again, social media probably plays into that. Why should I care about my subconscious or about different aspects of my personality when I've got to focus on just making it through day to day?
Good question. Yeah, I love that, Scott. And ultimately,
Keeping it real.
yeah. I can't tell anyone what to do. No one knows what someone else's needs are. But at the same time, I feel like it is harder and harder to know what our own true needs are right now.
Mm.
It really is like deep down, what do I need? And it might be, I need to just close my nail salon today and go to the cinema and eat ice cream. And that is for me my deepest need. And there doesn't need to be any
Mm.
psychoanalysis there, or don't need to take any mushrooms. I just need to just zone out from that.
Mhm.
Or maybe I need to have a mentor that I can speak to that just helps me, just figure out some of my business problems that I got coming up. So yeah, just tuning into that. What is my deepest need that I have right now? And yeah, I appreciate that. Like, I don't believe just coming back to psychedelics, I'm not one of those people that feels like you have to have a diagnosis of something and a doctor has to say, yes, okay, you're sick enough to use psychedelics. Good luck.
Mm.
No, I don't believe that's the paradigm that we're living in or we should be living in. So in a sense, some of that normalization of psychedelics is also normalization of developing a more attuned relationship with self and what do I need. So it might be, you know what, yeah, I need to take the day off today, or you know what, I might need to go and speak to a doctor about ketamine, or get a therapist and work on this aspect of my mental health.
Well, David, what you're saying really does have some interesting implications, particularly in light of a lot of the more highly publicized stories about psychedelics, as well as a lot of the episodes that we've had on this show and that appear on other shows where people talk about their life, potentially life erasing struggles that psychedelics have helped them with. And, uh, a lot of the struggles that everyday folks might be facing might be oppressive. They might make their lives awful. They might be stressing them out, but they haven't arisen to the level in which suicide or a complete inability to function has occurred. Or it might simply be that a slow build is happening, right? Like your business is slowly getting worse and worse and worse, and you're slowly getting more and more stressed out, and your staff and your team is getting more and more stressed out, and you're having problems at home. And
Mm.
on any given day, all of these things might not rise to the level of someone whose story has already been shared on this podcast or others where they're at the brink of suicide or they can't get out of bed or anything, but a year or two from now, they may be in that place. And so I'm hearing that if you're thinking about this stuff and if we are positioned to use tools that are out there to normalize access to these tools, then people might not ever get to that point in the first place, which leads me then to ask you a little bit more deeply in your mind, what is the role of psychedelics? And my language might not be right, David. So have patience with me. I just speak like the homeboy that I am. If your issues are subclinical, if they're just
Hmm.
stressing, what might integration of psychedelics into your uh, well-being or your personal happiness or personal fulfillment, or I just need a break from all this stress in my life, toolbox look like?
I love that you just threw the word toolbox in there, Scott, because I think if we only have a
Uh-oh.
toolbox that's got like, some ketamine or some mushrooms or LSD in there, that's not that, that's a pretty cool toolbox, but that's not enough. Like our toolbox needs things like, meditation and sleep and good food and good relationships and so many other things. So I think a piece of this is just not glamorizing psychedelics as a magic pill. It's like, oh, I'm stressed, I'm going to take this pill, or I'm sad, I'm going to take this pill. So it's much more than just reaching for a pill, and that's moving again from a different paradigm. Like now in our paradigm, we take pills for everything. Weight loss drugs especially. So I think moving into that more nurturing relationship. So a couple of examples that spring to mind. A lot of folks are using psychedelics as microdosing. Why? I think some of them it's for productivity at work and efficiency and focus and energy and stamina. Quite a lot of athletes and endurance athletes are using them as well. But then quite a few other people are using it in a sense to slow them down as well, to make them become more attuned and embodied. And for me, just that word embodied and embodiment is the key word for the last couple of years in my life, how psychedelics have helped. Because I've needed to slow down. I've needed to be more in my body and less just in my head, because my head can be quite a scary and intense place. And it's just always thinking and doing. And so embodiment is a really important part of, I would say, the psychedelic toolbox, and that our use of psychedelics should come with that embodiment tool. And then the second tool is mindfulness, is developing just a greater awareness of our mind and the different thoughts that come and go and the reactions that we have, and being able to kind of just be aware of how I'm feeling in a certain conversation with somebody. And am I being a dick? Am I speaking out of line right now? Is this me just kind of reacting in an old pattern of being wounded and being defensive? And can I just be honest with myself about that? And how on earth am I going to react differently? Okay, so I need to go into that space within myself. So these are some of the really important tools I'd say for folks to look at. And yeah, psychedelics do help with stress and with depression. They really, they can do, but not just from taking a magic pill, from really wanting to go into this as a process. And it takes time, and maybe it be months or years. And once you kind of go into it, it can be quite exciting and playful and curious, just seeing, oh, wow, that's what's been going on in my life when I feel like that, in that, with that person or in that scenario. Huh. Okay, now I get it.
When I first began recording this podcast, one of the cautions that I got from people who care about me, and they were coming from a place of concern, not being critical or anything like that, was that I was setting myself up to be perceived as a druggie. The weird thing is, I don't even drink. I, I never imagined that this would be a topic that I would be thinking about. But part of why I have come to feel comfortable with this topic is something that's meaningful and something that differentiates its integration into our life from being, crack addict, let's say, is that it is, in order to be effective, consistently advocated for by people with knowledge in the field, that it is part of this overall set of well-being modalities that we would bring into our lives. How did you, David, come into the world of psychedelics? You look just like such an innocent soul. What happened?
Oh boy. Yeah. So there's something called drug exceptionalism that is important in this work, particularly with all drugs being criminalized pretty much right now. So I'm talking about my relationship with drugs right now, Scott. And from an early age, there was something about drugs that helped me because they enabled me to disassociate, to tune out of my self-hatred, my fears, my anxieties, and yeah, just to feel like I wasn't me. And that at that time was a good thing. So I started inhaling matches as a kid. Before I could get my hands on drugs, I just started to get matchboxes and just start to strike matches and inhale them, and they made me feel good. And it kind of started from there. And cannabis has been something that has been in my life since I was 13, and it really has helped me massively over the years. I'm 45 now, so 32 years later. It's really helped me with back pain in my later years, but growing up, it just helped to give me some space in my mind. When my mind was a scary place. So cannabis in particular has been really helpful, just to enable me to take a step or two backwards and take a few deep breaths to slow things down and to really talk to myself about how am I doing, and just to get a bit more perspective on my life and to challenge some of those negative thoughts, and to try and get a bit more positivity and resilience around the good stuff in my life. So it's been really helpful for that. And then I moved on to other psychedelics, and as a student at Nottingham University, I fell into drum and bass as my favorite music ever. I listened to it every day for 25 years.
Get out of here. I love drum and bass too.
Uh,
I have never met another person in my life that likes drum and bass. If you're listening to or watching this show, check out drum and bass music, please. I love it.
Yeah.
And you like silence, you said?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Music really has such a powerful effect. Sound, like we're just studying about it in our course, and some of it is the frequency and the wavelengths. But yeah, with drum and bass, it enabled me in a sense just to, to get out of my body, but also to get into my body and to express myself through dance. And MDMA at the time was, that's what everyone was using, and so that was part of my life back then. And then magic mushrooms, were quite freely available in other parts of the world where I lived, in New Zealand in particular. So it's just overall, I don't know how to summarize it. I want to obviously put my responsible social worker dad hat on, and really let people know that these things are very powerful, and they're to be respected with intense respect. And you never know what's going to happen, and to prepare and to have good kind of support and foundations in life. And at the same time, boy, they have really helped me to grow and to love myself for sure. Like I can just briefly try and tell you, Scott, about one experience 2 years ago that was a life changer for me, using psilocybin. And then again, a few months ago, psilocybin again. And the two experiences were very much related to each other, going into, in a sense, my inner child work and trauma as a kid, and that self-hatred that I had, and just allowing a stuck energy and belief about myself that's deep within my body literally was just given permission to be released. And when that energy inside my body, in my gut, released, I just broke down in hysteric tears and started screaming a little bit and went into a fetal position, and there was a lightness there. And again, I'm not cured. It's ongoing, just still working around that wound and kind of helping me to continue healing it. But yeah, these are all invitations, and we don't know exactly what we're being invited to. But there's been times where I've known, what, I know where I need to go inside myself. I know what part of my life or what part of my wounds or my challenges that are kind of top of the surface or on the list. And so I can't control what's going to happen during a journey, but sometimes I'm able to really kind of conjure it up and invoke a part of my life and a part of myself that really needs attention and love and clarity and balance.
Before we go any further, I have to sit up here and say, and it happens to be true, that under no circumstances is Webdelics advocating for people to be using cannabis when they're 13 years old. But at the same time, We also understand that this is a space where people tell their stories and they're honest about them. And I appreciate your
Mm.
candor with regards to that issue. Talk to us a little bit about then you talked about how these revelations have changed you and given you a sense of freedom, but then what has that meant in your work? Like, how has that been if you are dealing with a challenging patient, or if there's a business challenge that you're facing in your in your psychotherapy practice, or if there's something that goes on at Psychedelics Today? I'm sure such a thing never happens, but in any other business out there that might not be the way you want it to be, and it might conceivably stress you out. How has this played out concretely so that I, as someone hearing this, can go beyond, okay, this is something that is life changing and transforming from a big picture theoretical perspective, but that's still like, what does it mean for me in my life that's practical if my boss is yelling at me, for instance?
Yeah, 100%. It's enough that these experiences have helped me personally with back pain and OCD and depression and suicide ideation. That's very personal and kind of internal. And at the same time, they really have helped me as a man and as a father and as a husband. I can say that there's some kind of toxic masculinity that I've dealt with and some insecurity about seeing myself as a man. Like, I'm middle aged now, there's no denying it. I'm ripe in my 40s, and it's definitely helped me to step up into my power, as a leader, expressing my opinions, like, that this is a bad idea, or I've got some reservations about this idea, can we explore these, please? Giving feedback a bit more confidently. And yes, these are things that in a sense we should be able to do as grown-ups, but yeah, as a wounded human being, there's parts of me that have kind of shied away from confrontations and challenging others. And in marriage and in parenthood, there are so many challenges that come up every single day. So it's definitely helped me as a dad to slow things down and not just react instantly when I'm triggered, particularly just reinforcing the patterns that I had with my dad, and not just doing what he did to me with my son and my daughter. So it just gives me almost like half a second just to take a breath and just to have a choice rather than just reacting out of routine and patterns. So to have a choice in how to react. And sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't. And I think the same thing as a husband, with my wife. It's really, I'm still doing so much work on how to be a better husband, but I can definitely see how they've helped me to be a little bit less arrogant and egotistical, to be more secure in accepting when I've done things in the not ideal way, and when I could handle things better, and I could take on more responsibility, particularly, Scott, responsibility and accountability. For me, everyone's different, like where the medicine goes. For me, just being responsible and accountable for what I do and what I don't do, and saying, okay, so I need to work on that.
Self accountability, self responsibility, and what you mentioned earlier, speaking honestly, respectfully, but honestly about feedback that you have, or uh, statements like, I think this is a bad idea, that you might have been reticent about throwing out there earlier, goes as to a common thread that I'd like to hear your thoughts on, and that is externalizing your truth. Am I hearing you say that psychedelics have helped you, when used in concert with the other things that we've discussed earlier, live out your truth more? Or is that just me throwing
Yeah.
things into your words that have nothing to do
No.
with anything that you said?
Yeah, I love that you're bringing emphasis to that. Definitely, to kind of tuning into it and revealing that truth, and then expressing, embodying, and living it, externalizing it. Definitely, and that can be done in so many different ways, in so many different parts of our life, different relationships, work, family, friends. Yeah, yeah. I think truth is a really big part of this, and honestly, I've had moments in my life when I knew I wasn't living up to my truth, or I just didn't feel able to be accountable to that. So you accept second best, And so something I've really been trying to do a lot in my life is stop accepting second best. If I know it's second best, then why is that good enough for me?
It also swings back, though, to the very beginning of our conversation, truth and not accepting second best. Well, when you think about the big picture challenges that we as a society and culture are facing, climate change, disengagement, feeling alone, even though you're looking at social media and supposedly connected with people all the time, what are you doing inside? Are you accepting second best? Are you accepting social media connections or the perceptions that people throw out about themselves as truth or as reality or as a genuine connection? Are you letting something that's second best be a substitute for real connection and real honesty about what people are struggling with? Thinking about things like climate change and war or other social divisions. Are we accepting the second best, which is a fantasy that we want to live in, that pumping more and more pollutants into the air has no bad impact at all?
Mm.
And that rising sea levels and floods and extreme weather have absolutely nothing to do with the exact thing that scientists have been saying for decades will cause these exact things? Or were we willing to face the truth and then do something about it, maybe free ourselves from this future that's awful? I'm feeling in what you're saying that settling for second best, whether personally, interpersonally, or socially, as well as not being willing to accept and run with and own and be accountable for the truth, whether it's our truth or the truth of the world that we're living in, is setting ourselves up for disconnection, not with just ourselves, but with the best possible future. And to me, thinking about this, when you're talking about paradigmatic shifts, honesty, truth, and not accepting second best seem to almost be that thunderbolt in the heart of it all.
Yeah, I like where this is going. And there's a thought that I've got in my head around what does it mean to be second best? And I feel like one way of answering that could be that we're not valuing the right thing. We're not prioritizing the right thing in our life. Like, what do I really believe in? What's really important to me? And I can work too hard for sure. Like, I'm a little bit of a workaholic, to be honest. Is that the most important thing to me? Not really. I love my work. I love Psychedelics Today. I believe in it with all my heart. But I want more time with my kids. I want to do exercise and go to the beach near where I live more often. I want to be able to do more yoga and meditation and writing. I want to read a book, but it's really hard. And those things are really important to me. So they're not second best. I just simply haven't found a way to make them work for me. And another way of answering the question about what is second best is if I'm not valuing the other people in my life sufficiently, and if I'm not also valuing some kind of giving back to others, whether that's people in my family or clients that I'm supporting or people in my community or just the world at large, like if I'm just thinking about me, then in a sense that's second best. So I feel like there has to be something within this question that values others, and on another level just values complexity. So when we're making these decisions about what's important to me and how do I navigate balance and challenge, and we have to acknowledge just of the existence of complexity, because our minds crave simplicity and order. And something that psychedelic research shows, the rebus model of Carhart Harris, in a sense, our brain always tries to simplify reality. It tries to form patterns and, in a sense, to skip over nuances of life that don't fit within that kind of default mode network. And so when our mind brain is able to experience atrophy, that's when we truly connect with the complexity of life, the good and the bad, and that which we do not yet know what it actually is. And that can be really helpful in a sense, just for having more ease with God. Life's tough, isn't it? When we just realize just how complex it is. So what is my role in it? Oh, it's not to make it simple. It's not to make it perfect. It's not to have all the answers. And that itself can be just part of the answer, is not needing to have all the bloody answers all the time.
I think I just loved you a little bit more than I already did, my brother. This is something that really speaks to me because this
Yeah.
is, particularly in a democratic society, something of massive importance. I like so and so candidate because they make things simple. Now, I understand as a politician or a leader of any sort, you've got to be able to explain things in a way that folks can understand. I think that that's a totally reasonable expectation of any leader. But, you know, for instance, I had a conversation recently on another podcast with a person who is a marketer. And this individual said, when it comes to how I vote, when it comes to the decisions that I make, when it comes to solutions, things need to be simple, and things have to be simple. If you're not simple, then you are not worth listening to. And again, when we're talking about a society or a work life or a personal life or a whole host of other things in life, macro or micro, that we deal with every day, simplicity really is second best.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about something else that you just said, when you were talking about working hard and needing to do that and having ambition, but also wanting to be with your family and spend some time on the beach and all that sort of stuff. I had another conversation recently in which someone said, my goal is to make $1 million, to have $1 million liquid in the bank. And more power to you, brother, I wanted to say. But what I really said was, wouldn't it be interesting if you instead had 1 million units of joy
Mm-hmm.
and one endlessly liquid bank account that was filled with nothing but joy and happiness? And how much easier would that be to experience? How much more valuable would that be? And we even got into a discussion about tithing. This person believes in tithing and spending a tenth of his income. And he said, I want to be able to spend a tenth of my income, which would come to blah, 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 if I'm making $1 million on this topic. I said, now what if you were tithing 1/10 of your joy? And what if you were tithing 20%? And he said, wow, I could be tithing 99% of my joy and I'd still have all of this joy because joy regenerates on my own. I'm not dependent on anything else for it. And so even then thinking about when you're talking about, well, what do we value? Are we valuing things that are second best? A house, big muscles if you're a male and on TikTok or Instagram, or a place that's been a face that has been transformed not by psychedelics but by plastic surgery and fillers, right? What are we really valuing? Are we valuing what's second best, and what are we doing with ourselves? I would like to, with that, you've made some powerful statements. Psychedelics is your soapbox. I think I understand why, David.
Mm.
But if that soapbox is one which you stand up every day and you grab that megaphone and you shout it out and the whole world hears your message, what will that lead us to, do you think? And what will it lead you in your own life to?
Beautiful. So yeah, I work for Psychedelics Today. So when anyone asks me what my job is, I can't hide it. You know, my kids know that's what I do. Yeah, Dad works in psychedelics. So it's something I've gotten used to how to talk to people about it. I am proud of it. Why? And I think in a way it's because psychedelics are a bit of a Trojan horse for meaning making, for exploration, for I think giving ourselves permission to ask big questions and to unify the individual and the collective. So all of these things for me are a part of talking about psychedelics on a soapbox. And another big piece as well is around destigmifying psychedelics. There's a lot of misinformation and beliefs that aren't necessarily grounded in science, but also in the average experience. And part of that could be not to take psychedelics too casually, and some of it could be not to take psychedelics with excessive caution, like they're going to poison you and you're going to get addicted to them just from touching them. So there's a very nuanced piece of information around just what are psychedelics. And some of that is just getting rid of the misinformation and really talking about it. And when you hear hundreds and thousands of people talking about their experiences with psychedelics and how it's helped them, and some people how it was really difficult and it didn't go as well as they helped, that is elevating our conversation as a society in a more nuanced and complex way. And from that, we then start to formulate policy and protocols and organizations that enable us as a community to access the potential for psychedelics in a safe, responsible way. But we've got to start having these really complex, nuanced conversations. And that's, for me, that's what the soapbox is. That's why we do podcasts like you. So we can just get those conversations started.
This has been such a rich conversation. I'm just going to have to probably get a mop afterwards and clean up the floor underneath my chair because my mind's been blown. Now my brain's splattered all over the place. And I blame you, David Drapkin. I will not hold myself accountable for this.
I did warn you. Yeah. Your fault.
If there is one takeaway that I can leave this conversation with, I can't help but think about the idea of truth and second best. If I'm not willing to face the truth about psychedelics or anything else out there, because I have accepted a narrative that is in place already, or because of my fear, or simply because it's different, then am I really settling for second best? If I am not thinking about the totality of my life. You said a minute ago, psychedelics give us the permission to ask big questions. Well, if the only thing I'm thinking about is how many likes did my most recent social media post get, or did I get that next $2 an hour raise, or did I have the last word during that discussion and prove that I was right? And am I focusing my mind on that? Or if my obsession is, well, what happened on that TV show last night? Is it really right what that character did? Can you believe she did that to so and so and this, that, and the other? Am I keeping myself from being able to ask the bigger questions? Are those behaviors or those thinking patterns themselves ways of not asking the bigger question? And again, am I settling when it comes to my mind, my thinking and my possibilities? Am I settling for second best? David, if there is one last word or something that you haven't really got a chance to share yet that you want to, what would that or those things be?
There was a moment when you brought up the practicality of the person working in a nail salon. And I really appreciated that. So for me, that brought up this conversation around just a regular person. You know, a lot of my life, I'm just with researchers and therapists and business people working in the psychedelic space. But it's regular people. We're all regular people. Like, these job titles mean nothing. Like, we are all regular human beings. And this question of where in our life is there an opportunity to ask a question of meaning, and how simple could it be to find something that is attainable from within us, when that doesn't have to be a psychedelic. You know, we do a lot of breath work at Psychedelics Today. That's a big part of what we do. So for me, is this, I've got a vision in my mind of someone in Manhattan, where I used to live, and I know where you are, and lots of nail salons there. So
Yes,
someone in a nail salon, and just taking that moment of silence, because we spoke about that too, and going within, with or without psychedelics or cannabis or anything. So for me, just being a regular human being and beginning that process of inquiry, exploration within, identifying parts and energies, and becoming more embodied within ourself. And that is a lifelong, beautiful story that, yeah, we get to tell. And it just always is evolving. And so, yeah, that what kind of stands out to me. And we've all got our own story, and it's beautiful. And I think that's one of the tragedies. I don't feel like we're enough of us are storytellers of our lives right now. And I really want to hear more stories right now.
I do too. Thank you for that. David, after this incredible conversation, people are going to want to find out more about you and hear about projects that you have going on. Share, please.
You got it. Thanks for listening, everybody. I've had a lovely chat with Sky. It's awesome to be on Webdelics. And if you want to find out more, I'm a LinkedIn guy. So yeah, check me out on LinkedIn, David Drapkin. If you are interested in Psychedelics Today, we've got 3 different websites I'll tell you about. So there's psychedelicstoday.com, our backlog of podcasts, of blogs, articles, and events online and in real life. Psychedeliceducationcenter.com is where we've got about a dozen courses, some of which are free, different shapes and sizes. Go check them out there. And then our kind of our work of art is Vital, our 12-month training course. That is vitalpsychedelictraining.com. And our 4th cohort is beginning classes in September. So whenever this goes out, that might still be open to admissions. Otherwise, it'll be the next one. So yeah, just go check out those sites. And the only other piece I would say is, where do we all live? Planet Earth. So go check out Planet Earth, whether that's looking up to the sky or looking down into the mud or down in the ocean. Yeah, just find yourself there, because that's where we need to all be a lot more nowadays.
I think your homie here is going to be going to Central Park when we're done with this conversation. Thank you for that. For those of you who are listening or watching, please stay tuned for upcoming episodes because we have some amazing stuff coming up. For instance, we're going to have a whole discussion about how you prepare for your first experience if that's something you decide you want to do. We are also going to be talking about bad trips. We're going to be having a series of episodes in which we do deep dives into specific substances that we have gotten a lot of inquiries about: MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin. And we have much, much more than that packed in the schedule, and it's all going to be great. If you enjoy what we are doing here, make sure that you tell everyone that you know and that you care about what we're doing so they can learn and feel and make informed decisions for themselves. In addition, if you enjoyed this episode or any other, make sure that you leave a 5-star review for this podcast on your favorite audio platform. Subscribe to us there too, and then go to YouTube and leave a thumbs up as well as positive remarks in the comments about this episode, and subscribe to Webdelics on that platform as well. Then we need you to go and sign up to our Instagram account, or not sign up to it, but follow us on Instagram, follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. And after you have done all of that, check out our website, webdelics.com. That's webdelics.com for the latest, accurate, scientifically vetted, and trustworthy information about psychedelics and plant medicine. However, all of that being said, above all else, be sure to come back next time for another episode of the Webdelics podcast.